He was just riding an old motorcycle, desperate to deliver a bag of rare blood that could save his niece's life. But on a quiet Georgia road, flashing lights stopped him cold. Two officers stood in his way, one with suspicion, the other with arrogance. And yet, standing between them was a German Shepherd, a K9 with instincts sharper than any badge. What unfolded next would shatter pride, test dignity, and prove that even in the darkest moments, respect and compassion can change everything. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe people and animals deserve respect, not prejudice, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. It was the kind of afternoon where the sun seemed reluctant to shine, smothered by thick gray clouds rolling low over Millbrook, Georgia. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of pine and the distant tang of rain not yet fallen. A narrow country road cut through the quiet outskirts, cracked asphalt lined with drooping telephone wires and tall grass gone dry from weeks of late summer heat. The town itself was unremarkable to outsiders' brick storefronts, a single diner that closed by 9, and a hospital that stood as its most important lifeline. On that road, Officer Caleb Hayes guided his patrol car at an unhurried pace. Caleb was 38 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the square jaw of a man who had lived too long in uniform. His blonde hair was cropped short, flecked at the temples with early strands of gray, and his steel blue eyes carried the weariness of someone who had seen both the best and the worst of people. Though known among fellow deputies as steady and fair, Caleb often felt the weight of expectations pressing against his chest. He wanted to do right by the badge, but he had also seen too many colleagues take the wrong turn when pride or prejudice clouded judgment. That inner conflict had hardened him, made him cautious, slower to trust, but not yet cynical. Beside him sat his partner, not human but K9 Max, a German Shepherd now 10 years old. Max was large but lean, with fur a coarse blend of black and tan, streaks of silver peppering his muzzle. His amber eyes gleamed with the sharp intelligence of an animal who had spent his life serving. A faint scar stretched along his right flank, a reminder of a knife wound sustained during a raid years ago. His left ear dipped slightly at the tip, giving him a look that was both dignified and gently worn. Max's name had not been chosen casually. Caleb remembered the day well. Nearly a decade earlier, during Max's first real deployment, the dog had saved a young boy named Maxwell during a hostage standoff. The child had been barely 7, terrified and clutching a teddy bear, when Max broke through the barricade, disarmed the suspect by sheer force, and shielded the boy with his own body. Maxwell's parents wept and begged the handler to let the dog bear their son's name, so the story would never be forgotten. From that day forward, he wasn't just the dog on the force. He was Max, the living reminder of a life pulled back from the edge. Caleb had taken over as Max's handler years later, inheriting not just a partner, but a legacy. Caleb reached down now and rested a hand briefly on Max's neck as they rolled down the empty stretch of highway. "Still got it, old boy," he murmured. Max's ears twitched, his nose pressed to the open crack of the window, reading the scents the way Caleb read road signs. Though age had stiffened his joints, his spirit remained unbowed. Ahead, a faint hum grew into a ragged buzz. The sputtering cough of a motorcycle engine drifted across the silence. Caleb narrowed his eyes as he spotted a figure riding slowly up the road, a man hunched over a battered Honda bike that looked 2 decades old. The rider's jacket was worn leather, patches frayed, and the back wheel wobbled slightly as though it had survived one too many miles. The rider was David Carter, 46 years old, African-American, with the lean frame of a man who had worked too many years with his hands and carried too many burdens on his back. His face was lined but handsome, his short-cropped hair peppered with gray, his eyes focused with determination. He had grown up in Millbrook but had left young, chasing factory work in Atlanta before returning years later when his sister passed away. Since then, David had lived quietly, caring for his niece as if she were his own. Life had not been kind to him. Layoffs, debts, whispers of trouble that weren't always his fault. Still, he carried himself with dignity, though his clothes were plain and his motorcycle more rust than chrome. Caleb slowed as the bike approached. Something about the way the man rode the sagging saddlebags, the urgency in his posture, made him lift a hand. His training urged caution. He flicked on his lights and the patrol car eased across the lane, signaling for the rider to stop. David's heart sank as the flashing red and blue beams caught his rear view. He pulled to the shoulder, gravel crunching under bald tires. His hands trembled only slightly as he killed the engine, but inside his chest, panic thundered. In the cooler, strapped behind him, lay a package more precious than gold. A unit of O-negative blood, the rare type needed urgently at the Cedar Falls Children's Hospital, where his niece, Ava Carter, lay fighting for her life. Ava was just 9, frail and pale from a congenital condition that left her needing transfusions to survive. David had volunteered to fetch the blood when the hospital called because time was slipping fast. Every minute lost meant Ava's chances shrank. Now, forced to stop by police, he felt despair gnawing at him. Caleb stepped from the patrol car, boots crunching the gravel. His voice was calm but firm. "Afternoon, sir. License and registration, please." David swallowed hard. He looked up at the officer, tall, stern, a man used to being obeyed. He didn't see malice in Caleb's eyes, but neither did he see trust. Slowly, he reached into his jacket for his wallet. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Officer, I don't have time for this. My niece, she's waiting at the hospital. I'm carrying blood. Please, I need to go." Max padded forward on the leash, nose twitching. The old dog ignored David's trembling hands and instead pressed his snout to the side of the cooler. He inhaled deeply, then gave a short, low bark, not hostile but insistent. Caleb frowned. He knew that bark. It was the sound Max gave when he sensed something urgent, something real. Caleb glanced back at David, then at the battered motorcycle, then at Max. Doubt tugged at him. Training told him to verify, to control the situation, but his partner, the dog who had never once steered him wrong, was telling him something else entirely. And so, on that gray afternoon, the stage was set. An officer torn between protocol and compassion, a man fighting the clock to save a child, and a dog whose very name carried the memory of second chances. The late afternoon air in Millbrook thickened with the promise of rain. A distant rumble of thunder crawled across the sky, though no drops yet fell. The roadside was silent save for the faint ticking of David Carter's motorcycle engine, cooling as it rested against the gravel shoulder. The red and blue patrol lights pulsed rhythmically across his tense face, reflecting in the sweat that beaded at his hairline. Officer Caleb Hayes stood in front of the bike, shoulders squared, one hand resting on his belt. His voice, low and professional, carried the weight of authority. "License and registration." He had said it countless times in his 12 years of service, but this time something in his tone betrayed his uncertainty. His instincts nagged him. Something about this man was different. Something about the situation pressed heavier than a routine stop. David's hands shook as he pulled his worn wallet from his jacket pocket. His fingers fumbled against the cracked leather, the edges frayed from years of use. He offered his license with a voice roughened by urgency. "Officer, please, I don't have time. My niece, she's in the hospital. They called me. I've got the blood she needs right here. O-negative, she's slipping away." Caleb glanced at the license but didn't lower his guard. He had heard too many stories, too many excuses at traffic stops meant to dodge accountability. Still, his eyes flicked toward the cooler strapped behind the motorcycle. It was old but sturdy, its white plastic sides scuffed from long use. He took a cautious step closer. Max, the German shepherd, moved first. The dog's nose lowered to the ground, then lifted as he circled to the cooler. His amber eyes narrowed with sharp intent. Instead of barking aggressively as he often did in these tense encounters, Max pressed his muzzle against the side of the cooler. He inhaled deeply, then gave a soft but distinct bark once, low and resonant. He paused, then licked at the sticker label affixed to the lid, the faded print that read, clearly, O-negative. Caleb froze, the scene unfolding before him with an uncanny clarity. Max had never behaved like this before, not at a traffic stop, not during a drug bust, not in training drills. This was no random quirk. Caleb's heart tugged against his training. He knew his dog. He trusted him more than most humans. Max was not just reacting, he was signaling. David leaned forward, desperation cutting through his trembling voice. "You see? Even your partner knows. Please, every minute counts." His dark eyes, wide and pleading, caught Caleb's. The deep lines on his face told a story of years of hardship and responsibility, yet there was no deception in them, only raw, unguarded fear. Miles away, in the fluorescent-lit halls of Cedar Falls Children's Hospital, A small girl fought for her life. Ava Carter, 9 years old, lay motionless in a hospital bed too large for her thin frame. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged blue. Her breaths came shallow, each one rattling through her chest like a candle flame fighting against the wind. Tubes connected her to monitors, their digital beeps counting down the moments with mechanical indifference. Beside her, Lily Nguyen, a 29-year-old nurse, knelt briefly in quiet prayer. Lily was of Vietnamese heritage, petite in build, her black hair tied neatly back in a ponytail that never seemed to loosen during her long shifts. Her almond-shaped eyes were tired from nights without sleep, but her spirit was unbroken. She had grown up the daughter of immigrants who had taught her the value of perseverance. Losing patience had scarred her before, but each time she found herself praying, even though she rarely admitted it aloud. Now, as she held Ava's frail hand, she whispered under her breath, "Hold on, little one, just hold on." The blood bank's shelves were nearly bare. They had called in every favor, but supplies of O-negative were exhausted. Hope rested entirely on David's journey, and every delay threatened to extinguish it. Back on the roadside, Caleb's doubts warred within him. He straightened, looking at David again. "You're telling me you're running a delivery of blood to the hospital, on that old bike, without notifying anyone, without escort?" His words were skeptical, but his tone carried less sharpness than before. David nodded quickly. "They called me, officer. I'm the only one who could get there fast enough. I can't afford a car anymore, but that doesn't matter. What matters is my niece, Ava. She needs this blood now, or she won't make it." His voice cracked on the last words, and for a brief moment his mask of composure shattered, showing the panic beneath. Max barked again, shorter this time, his tail rigid, but his posture calm. He pressed closer to the cooler, pawing lightly as though to underline the truth. Caleb watched his partner with a mixture of awe and unease. Max had served faithfully for years, tracking fugitives, detecting narcotics, protecting his handler. But this was something beyond training. This was instinct, loyalty, maybe something even more. Caleb exhaled slowly, rain scent heavy in the air. The sky darkened another shade, and a single drop splashed against the dust before vanishing. Somewhere deep inside, Caleb knew his next choice would define him, not just as an officer, but as a man. The quiet road of Millbrook stood still, charged with tension, as the clock ticked in two different places. A desperate man pleading on the roadside, and a small girl fighting for each breath inside a hospital room. And in between them, a dog whose eyes seemed to say, "Trust me." The sky over Millbrook had grown darker, the kind of heavy dusk that seemed to press down on everything below it. The wind hissed through the pine trees lining the road, carrying the static hum of approaching storm. Caleb Hayes stood torn, watching David Carter's trembling hands as the man tried to explain, while Max lingered by the cooler, giving another low, insistent bark. Caleb's heart leaned toward trust, but protocol still pinned his boots to the ground. That was when another sound broke into the scene, the rising wail of a second patrol car's siren. A dark sedan pulled up, tires crunching gravel as it slid behind Caleb's cruiser. From it emerged Officer Raymond Doyle, 42 years old, his build thick and bullish. His face was broad, jaw square like carved granite, and his pale blue eyes carried the chill of a man who enjoyed the authority of his badge too much. His hair was clipped close, streaks of gray just beginning to show, though his energy burned with an almost reckless vigor. Doyle had earned a reputation across the department decisive, yes, but also hot-headed, dismissive, and prone to see threats where none existed. Years earlier, he had lost a younger brother in a drug deal gone wrong, and though he rarely spoke of it, that wound had twisted his view of others. He often looked at men like David through the lens of suspicion, carrying his grief like a loaded gun. "Hayes," Doyle barked, stepping forward with swagger in every stride. "What's going on here? Who is this?" His hand rested on the cuffs at his belt, eyes flicking over David with obvious disdain. "Another excuse-maker wasting our time?" David instinctively stiffened. His fingers tightened around his license and he shook his head. "Please, I told your partner. My niece is at the hospital. I'm carrying blood. She needs it now." Doyle snorted, a humorless sound. "Blood? On that rusted bike of yours?" He circled, sizing David up the way a predator measured prey. "You think I haven't heard every story in the book? You people always got a reason. Always got an emergency." Caleb frowned, a muscle twitching at his jaw. Doyle, he might be telling the truth. The cooler. but Doyle cut him off with a sharp gesture. Truth? Look at him, Hayes. Shaking, sweating, babbling. He's hiding something. Probably drugs, maybe worse. He pulled the handcuffs free with a metallic snap. Let's end this before it drags on. Max moved then. The old shepherd, who had been calm before, suddenly stepped forward, placing his solid frame between Doyle and David. His amber eyes locked on Doyle's, his teeth bared just enough to send a warning. A low growl vibrated in his chest, not the frenzied bark of attack, but the measured threat of a seasoned guardian. For the first time that day, Doyle hesitated. He glanced at Caleb, incredulous. You letting your mutt challenge me now? His voice was sharp, tinged with both anger and embarrassment. Caleb's voice came steady. Max doesn't do this without reason. You know that. Doyle sneered. Dogs don't think, Hayes. They react, and you're letting him call the shots. He lunged a half step toward David, cuffs raised. Max snarled louder, paws planted like stone. The tension in the air could have snapped steel. Caleb raised a hand, forcing his tone firm. Back off, Doyle. We need to confirm before we escalate. There's a child's life on the line. Meanwhile, a pair of eyes watched from across the street. Ethan Martinez, a 14-year-old boy from the neighborhood, crouched behind a leaning fence, his hoodie bright red and a little too big flapped in the wind. He clutched his phone tightly, its cracked screen glowing as he recorded the scene. Ethan was lanky, with sharp cheekbones and wide, curious brown eyes. He was known among his friends for being nosy, always filming pranks or minor accidents for social media. But this time felt different. He could sense the weight in the air, the way grown men moved like they were on the edge of something dangerous. His thumb hovered, then pressed firmly to record. Through his screen, he captured it all. David pleading, Caleb hesitating, Doyle swinging the cuffs like a hammer waiting to fall, and Max old, scarred Max standing unshaken, his growl the only thing holding the storm at bay. Back at Cedar Falls Hospital, the clock ticked louder than the thunder outside. Ava's monitors beeped irregularly, her breathing shallow. Nurse Lillian Gwen stepped into the hallway for a moment, pressing a hand to her forehead. She spotted the pediatrician on duty, Dr. Samuel Price, a man in his mid-50s with thinning sandy hair and a soft voice. His round glasses perched low on his nose, and his face carried the gentle weight of decades of watching children battle illnesses. He was known for his patience, though beneath it, grief lingered. He had once lost his own daughter to a rare blood disorder, and it had carved into him a quiet determination to save every child he could. Doctor, Lily whispered, voice cracking. We're out of O-negative. The courier hasn't arrived. She doesn't have much longer. Price nodded grimly, his lips pressed tight. We hold her stable. We wait. Sometimes miracles arrive late. He didn't say what both of them knew, that sometimes miracles never came at all. Outside, rain finally began to fall, light at first, but steady. Drops speckled Caleb's uniform and slicked the leather of David's jacket. Doyle still held the cuffs, jaw set like stone. Caleb stood motionless, waiting, while Max's growl filled the gap where human judgment faltered. Across the street, Ethan's phone continued to capture every frame, a digital witness to a moment where pride and prejudice collided with truth and survival. And in that instant, Millbrook's quiet road was no longer ordinary. It was a stage where lives, reputations, and dignity hung in the balance, waiting for the next move. The rain had begun in earnest now, sheets of water sliding across the cracked asphalt, pooling in the ditches on either side of the quiet Millbrook road. The storm cast everything in muted shades of gray, but the tension between the men on that shoulder burned as bright as ever. Officer Caleb Hayes tightened his jaw, his mind split between the stern commands of protocol and the insistent signals from Max, whose low growl had never yet failed him. David Carter stood clutching his wallet and shaking from more than just the cold drizzle, his eyes fixed on Caleb with the kind of plea that carried the weight of family, of life and death urgency. "Open it," Caleb said at last, his voice cutting through the rain. He pointed at the cooler. "Let's see what's inside." David's breath hitched. Relief and dread warred in his expression. Relief that perhaps the officer was finally listening. Dread that every wasted second could cost his niece's life. He bent quickly, his old jacket creaking, and unlatched the worn cooler. The lid lifted with a faint squeak, revealing a sealed medical pack within. Tubes coiled neatly, the label clear under the flashlight beam. Caleb angled down. "O, negative. Blood product urgent." The red liquid inside glimmered even in the storm's dim light. Caleb felt something twist in his chest. He had doubted, but here it was, undeniable. His lips parted, but no words came at first. Max broke the silence, padding over to David and sitting at his side with the quiet dignity of a sentinel, amber eyes steady as if to say, "I told you." Doyle, however, was not moved. His face twisted, brows furrowed, mouth curled into a sneer. "Could be staged," he muttered, though his voice lacked the conviction it carried earlier. He stepped closer, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "Anyone could slap a sticker on a bag. You think I'm stupid?" Caleb turned to him, voice sharper now. "That's enough, Doyle. It's hospital supply. Look at the seal, look at the packaging. You know this is real." His tone carried authority Doyle didn't expect, and for a moment the larger officer faltered. Across the street, movement began to stir. The commotion had drawn the attention of several residents of the neighborhood, men and women who had stepped out from their porches despite the rain. Among them was Mrs. Janine Holloway, a woman in her late 60s, known in Millbrook for her watchful eyes and sharp tongue. Short and sturdy, with silver hair pinned under a faded kerchief, Janine had lived on that road for 40 years. She leaned on her cane, peering out with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. "What's all this now?" she called, voice crackling but loud enough to cut through the storm. "That man's Carter, isn't he? He's a good man, leaves for work every morning, helps fix my fence last spring. Don't you dare treat him like a criminal." Her words emboldened others. A younger man, Marcus Bell, stepped closer. Marcus, 32, worked at the local lumberyard. Tall, wiry, with a shaved head and a ready smile usually reserved for lighter moments, he frowned now, his voice carrying across the rain. "I've seen him too. Keeps to himself, but ain't never caused trouble. If he says it's blood, then it's blood." Doyle's face darkened. "Back inside," he snapped, waving a hand at the gathering crowd. "This doesn't concern you." But it did concern them, and the crowd grew. Phones lifted, cameras blinked to life. Ethan Martinez, still recording from behind the leaning fence, grinned nervously as he saw the red number on his screen climb his video already streaming live to his small social media following. Within minutes, his stream had been clipped and reshared, given a title by Ethan himself, "The Dog Knew First." The caption scrolled beneath it as shares multiplied. "A cop's dog sides with the man they're trying to arrest. Who do you trust?" Back at Cedar Falls Hospital, the storm rattled the windows while Ava Carter lay in fragile stillness. Her breaths were shallow, her chest rising only faintly beneath the blanket. Nurse Lillian Gwyn checked the monitors again, whispering encouragement even though the girl could not hear. In the waiting room, David's sister Angela Carter, Ava's mother, sat with her head in her hands. Angela was 38, a tall woman with tired eyes and calloused hands from years cleaning houses around town. Life had been relentless since her husband left years earlier, and the illness of her only child had carved deep furrows of worry into her face. Yet despite exhaustion, her heart was fierce, her faith in her brother unshaken. "He'll come," she whispered to herself. "David won't let her go. He'll come." On the roadside, Caleb slowly lowered his flashlight, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He looked again at David, at the cooler, at Max's steady form. Something inside him hardened, not against David, but against the unfairness of the moment. His doubts crumbled, and conviction took their place. "This man is telling the truth," Caleb said firmly. "He's carrying blood. We're wasting time." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Doyle scowled, but his eyes darted toward the residents filming, toward Ethan's phone raised high. For the first time, uncertainty cracked his bravado. The badge on his chest felt heavier now, not as a symbol of authority, but as a mark under scrutiny. He gripped his cuffs tighter, but said nothing. Max nudged David's leg with his nose, a quiet gesture of reassurance. David looked down at the dog, stunned, lips parting in disbelief. A tear mingled with the rain on his cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, not just to the dog, but to the officer who finally seemed willing to listen. And all the while the storm raged, and across countless phones, the story was already no longer just Millbrook's. It was the world's. The rain did not relent. Instead, it grew heavier, striking the cracked road in steady drumming rhythms. Lightning flickered in the distance, casting sharp silhouettes of the small crowd that had gathered. Their voices, murmured but tense, mixed with the patter of the storm. In the middle of it stood Caleb Hayes, his hand hovering near his belt, the weight of his decision pressing down harder than the sky itself. One choice would be to follow his fellow officer's lead arrest, David Carter, detain him for questioning, and let the hospital wait. The other was to listen to his dog, to the truth he had just seen with his own eyes, and to the desperate pleading of a man who only wanted to save a child. David's lips trembled as he tried to steady his breathing. Rain streaked his weathered face, his jacket clung to him like second skin, and his dark eyes, so hollowed by years of hardship, shone now with raw urgency. "Officer Hayes," he whispered, his voice nearly drowned out by thunder. "She's running out of time." Doyle stood nearby, his stance rigid, cuffs still clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes narrowed with contempt. "Don't fall for it, Hayes. You give him that cooler, and it's on you. You think the chief will back you up when you've let contraband slip through because you trusted a sob story?" Max, drenched, water dripping from his ears, pressed forward between them. He tilted his head toward Caleb, amber eyes unwavering, chest rumbling with a sound that was not threat, but insistence. Caleb looked down at him and saw not just a dog, but 10 years of partnership years, where Max had never faltered, never misled, never hesitated when it mattered most. His scars, his limp on cold mornings, the gray spreading through his fur, these were the marks of loyalty, of truth earned one mission at a time. Caleb unclipped the cuffs from his belt. The sound of metal sliding against leather made Doyle stiffen. For a breath, the older officer looked almost triumphant, thinking Hayes would fall in line. But then Caleb's hand moved differently. He reached for David's wrist, not to restrain, but to release. The cuffs clinked softly as they shut around Caleb's own belt once more, not David's hands. He took the cooler from where it sat balanced on the bike and pressed it firmly back into David's grasp. "You're going to that hospital," Caleb said, his voice firm, steady, audible even over the storm. "And I'm going with you. Max, too." For a moment, silence reigned. The only sound was rain splattering against soaked uniforms. Then a murmur swept through the gathered residents, a wave of support. Doyle's face flushed red, veins standing out on his temple. "Hayes, this is insubordination," he snapped, spittle mixing with the downpour. "You're throwing away procedure, throwing away your career for what? Some guy on a busted bike with a cooler?" Caleb met his colleague's glare without flinching. "For a little girl's life," he said simply. David nearly sagged to his knees with relief. He clutched the cooler to his chest like it was part of him, his eyes shimmering with gratitude that words could not capture. Max nudged his leg once more, steady and grounding, before stepping back to Caleb's side, waiting for the next command. At the hospital, time was unraveling. Ava Carter's breathing had grown shallower, her chest rising only faintly. Her lips were pale, her fingers limp in her mother Angela's hands. Nurse Lillian Gwynn hurried into the room with Dr. Samuel Price trailing behind, their expressions grave. Price adjusted his glasses, his eyes dark with the shadow of memory. "She's crashing," he said quietly. "If the blood doesn't arrive in the next hour, we'll lose her." Angela lifted her tear-streaked face, desperation written in every line. "My brother," she whispered. "David will come. He promised." Back on the rain-slick road, Caleb motioned David toward his patrol car. "You won't make it on that bike in this weather. Get in. I'll drive. We'll escort you straight through." He opened the rear door, clearing the seat for the cooler, while Max leapt smoothly into the front passenger side, shaking rainwater onto the dashboard. David hesitated, then nodded, securing the cooler carefully inside before climbing in. His rough hands shook as he strapped in, the exhaustion of his ordeal catching up with him. But hope burned faintly now, fragile but alive. Doyle stood rigid on the roadside, fury burning in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Hayes," he shouted over the roar of the storm. "Don't think this won't follow you back to the station." Caleb paused before sliding into the driver's seat. He looked back once, his gaze steady. "Maybe it will, but at least I'll know I did the right thing." Then he closed the door, the sound sharp, final. The patrol car's engine growled to life. Sirens flared, cutting through the storm with piercing clarity. As the cruiser pulled onto the road, tires spraying water in a silver arc, the small crowd of neighbors erupted in cheers and claps, some raising their phones higher, their voices carried in the rain. Ethan's phone buzzed with notifications as his live stream exploded in viewers. On the screen, comments scrolled faster than he could read. "That cop's a hero." The dog knew first. Prayers for the little girl. The convoy set off one battered man, one faithful dog, and one officer who had chosen conscience over convenience. Rain pounded the windshield, wipers beating frantically, but inside the car there was a fragile peace. David sat clutching the cooler, whispering to himself, "Hold on, Ava, hold on." Max shifted, pressing his nose against the glass, watching the storm-streaked world blur past. Caleb's knuckles tightened around the wheel. He knew Doyle's anger would have consequences. He knew questions would be asked, but none of that mattered now. All that mattered was the hospital at the end of the road, and the life flickering like a candle waiting for wind. The storm had not eased. Rain hammered the windshield of Caleb's cruiser, wipers swiping furiously but barely keeping up. Headlights cut a pale path through the gray curtains, the red and blue lights reflecting off every raindrop in a fractured rainbow. Inside the car, silence clung thickly, broken only by the engine's growl and the occasional bark of thunder. David Carter sat in the passenger seat, clutching the cooler against his chest, knuckles white. His lips moved silently, prayers whispered to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. In the back, Max shifted restlessly, nose pressed against the window, eyes fixed on the blurred world beyond. They had left Doyle fuming behind, the crowd of neighbors cheering Caleb's choice. But Caleb knew that wasn't the end of it. He tightened his grip on the wheel, jaw clenched. He would deal with Doyle later. Right now, the only thing that mattered was Ava. The cruiser sped down Millbrook's winding roads, tires hissing against the soaked asphalt. Caleb leaned forward, eyes narrowing, scanning for the familiar landmarks. That was when his headlights flashed across an unexpected barrier. A massive oak tree, splintered and toppled, stretched across both lanes. Rain slicked its bark, branches jutting like broken arms, the storm having torn it from its roots. Caleb slammed the brakes, tires screeching as the cruiser skidded to a halt. David gasped, clutching the cooler tighter. "We can't stop now, there's no time." Caleb cursed under his breath. The main road was blocked, and detouring around would add at least 15 minutes time Ava didn't have. He reached for the radio, but before he could speak, Max leapt against the door, barking sharply. His body was rigid, tail stiff, ears pricked despite the rain dripping from them. He scratched at the window, then darted to the opposite side, barking again, this time short and insistent. Caleb frowned, watching his partner. "What is it, boy?" Max whined once, then pawed at the door handle, eyes fixed toward the left side of the road. Caleb followed his gaze and spotted it. A narrow, barely visible trail cutting down toward the riverbank. Overgrown and muddy, it wasn't made for cars, but it could serve as a shortcut. Caleb had used that trail once as a teenager, when fishing with his father. He knew it connected back to the road half a mile down, bypassing the fallen tree. David followed his eyes, shaking his head. "That path? In this rain? We'll never make it." Caleb hesitated for a breath, then glanced at Max. The dog barked again, lower this time, and pawed once more at the door. Trust had never been misplaced before. Caleb's decision crystallized. "We're taking it." He shifted the cruiser into gear and turned sharply off the main road, the tires plunging into mud with a jolt. The car swayed, engine growling, but Caleb's steady hands kept it straight. David held the cooler tighter, muttering Ava's name with each bump. The trail hugged the river, water rushing high and fast from the storm. Branches clawed at the sides of the cruiser, leaves smearing across the windows. Max leaned forward, watching every twist as though guiding Caleb's wheel. Then suddenly, Max barked again, this time different. Urgent. Alarmed. Caleb's eyes snapped forward, and his headlights revealed a shape ahead. A sedan overturned in the ditch, half submerged in mud, its hazard lights blinking weakly. Caleb slammed the brakes, the cruiser lurching to a stop. "Stay here," he ordered, already throwing the gear into park. But Max was faster. The German Shepherd bounded out the door the moment it opened, splashing into the rain-soaked mud, barking furiously at the wreck. David scrambled out too, clutching the cooler close but looking back anxiously. Caleb rushed to the car, mud sucking at his boots. The vehicle was crumpled, windshield shattered, one wheel spinning uselessly. Inside, he caught sight of a small figure in the back seat. A boy, no older than 8, strapped into a booster seat, his face pale and tear-streaked. His small fists banged weakly against the glass. Max circled the car, barking, then pawed frantically at the rear door. Caleb yanked at the handle. It was jammed. He gritted his teeth and braced his shoulder, shoving with all his weight. The door groaned, then gave, creaking open enough for Max to squeeze in. The dog clambered onto the seat, nudging the terrified child with his nose, licking his wet cheeks until the boy stopped screaming and clutched the thick fur around his neck. Caleb reached in, his hands steady despite the storm's chaos. "Hang on, kid. We've got you." He unclipped the seatbelt with a hard tug, pulling the boy free into his arms. The child sobbed, burying his face against Caleb's soaked uniform, one hand still clutching Max's ear as if it were a lifeline. David hovered nearby, eyes wide, clutching the cooler tighter. "Is he okay?" The boy whimpered but nodded faintly. Caleb scanned him quickly. No obvious broken bones, just shock and bruises. "He'll be fine," Caleb said, relief flickering in his voice. He set the child gently into David's arms for a moment. The boy clung to the stranger without hesitation, small fingers digging into David's jacket. Then Caleb looked at the wreck again and cursed softly. There could have been more. He peered inside, but the front seats were empty, airbags deployed. Whoever had been driving was gone, maybe to get help, maybe swept away in the storm. Max whined softly, shaking rainwater from his coat, then pressed his head into the boy's chest as if to calm him further. For a moment, despite the urgency of Ava's plight, the storm, and the chaos, there was stillness, the quiet miracle of a life pulled from the brink. But time was bleeding away. Caleb's eyes snapped back to the road. "We have to move, now." He gently took the boy back into his arms, hustled him into the back seat of the cruiser, Max hopping in beside him. David climbed in, cooler still hugged close. Caleb slammed the door, dropped into the driver's seat, and pushed the car back into gear. The cruiser roared down the muddy trail, spitting water and dirt, until the road widened again and they burst back onto asphalt. Caleb floored the accelerator. The sirens wailed louder, a cry against the storm, against time itself. In the back seat, the rescued boy pressed against Max, who licked his hand with quiet reassurance, while David whispered his niece's name like a mantra. At the hospital, Ava's heartbeat flickered weakly on the monitor. Lily Nguyen checked the screen, panic tightening her chest. Dr. Price hovered by her side, glasses fogged from the humidity. Angela clutched her daughter's limp hand, whispering prayers through her tears. The clock above the bed ticked mercilessly toward the hour that would decide everything. And on the storm-battered road, with a fragile cooler of blood and a second life unexpectedly saved, Caleb Hayes drove harder than he had ever driven before, guided by the flashing lights and the faith of a scarred old dog who always seemed to know the way. Rain still clung to their clothes when Caleb Hayes, David Carter, and Max burst through the automatic sliding doors of Cedar Falls Children's Hospital. The fluorescent lights inside burned stark and white, washing the hallway in sterile brightness that only made the urgency more piercing. Caleb carried the cooler himself now, his boots pounding against the linoleum floor, water trailing in his wake. Beside him, David stumbled, chest heaving, eyes hollow from fear. Max padded close, fur dripping, but head held high, amber eyes alert even here among the scent of antiseptic and despair. At the nurse's station, Nurse Lily Nguyen spotted them first. She rushed forward, her small frame cutting through the crowd with surprising force. Her black ponytail swung as she ran, her eyes wide when she saw the red and white cooler in Caleb's grip. "You have it?" she gasped, voice breaking. Caleb nodded sharply. "Oh, negative. Direct from him." He jerked his chin toward David. Lily's hands trembled as she took the cooler, relief breaking across her tired features. She didn't waste another second. She darted down the hall toward the operating suite. Caleb and David followed close behind, Max's paws clicking against the tile. In room 214, little Ava Carter's body was failing. Her mother, Angela Carter, rose from the chair at her bedside as the door burst open. Tall and weary, her hair frizzed from hours of wringing her hands, Angela had the face of someone who had endured too much loss for one lifetime. But when she saw her brother, tears spilled down her cheeks. "David," she sobbed, voice cracking, "you made it." David dropped beside her, clutching her arm. His chest heaved, his breath ragged. "I told you I would," he whispered. "I promised." Dr. Samuel Price, spectacles fogged from the sudden rush of bodies, strode in with Lily carrying the cooler. He was a man of quiet gravity, his thinning sandy hair damp with sweat despite the hospital's cool air. His voice was calm but quick. "Get it prepped. Now." Nurses wheeled in equipment, tearing open sterile packaging with efficient hands. Dr. Price leaned close to Angela and David. "We're going to start transfusion immediately. This is her chance." As the medical team swarmed, Caleb stood back in the corner, Max seated loyally at his side. The officer's eyes flicked from Ava's frail body to the cooler being connected, then back to David kneeling by the bed. He swallowed hard, realizing how close he had come to denying this child her hope. His gaze dropped to Max, who sat poised, ears pricked, eyes calm. Caleb whispered softly, "You knew, didn't you, old boy? You knew before I did." Max leaned against his leg, a steady weight that reminded him what trust looked like. Down the hall, commotion stirred again. Wet boots slapped against the floor, and the air thickened as Officer Doyle stormed in. His uniform was damp, his face flushed crimson with barely contained fury. Behind him trailed Chief Marla Bennett, the head of the Millbrook Police Department. Chief Bennett was in her early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with cropped auburn hair streaked silver at the temples. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had weathered political storms and real ones alike. Her eyes, sharp and gray, missed nothing. "Hayes," Doyle snapped, voice echoing in the sterile corridor. "You're finished. You defied orders, ignored protocol, handed over possible evidence like a rookie. Chief, Enough, Doyle." Chief Bennett's voice cut like steel. She raised a hand, silencing him. Her gaze swept the room, pausing on Caleb, on Max, and finally on the sight of Ava as the transfusion began, color already threatening to return to her pale cheeks. "I've seen the footage. The whole town has." Doyle's jaw slackened. "Footage?" From the back of the crowd stepped Ethan Martinez, hoodie plastered to his thin frame from rain, phone still in hand. His wide brown eyes shone with nervous pride. I filmed it," he stammered. "It's online. Everyone saw. The dog knew first. That's what I called it." Chief Bennett's phone buzzed, and she glanced down. Notifications stacked endlessly. Calls from the mayor, reporters, citizens flooding with support. She looked up at Doyle, her face unreadable but her voice measured. "Officer Doyle, you are suspended effective immediately pending investigation for misconduct and abuse of authority." Doyle's face flushed purple. "You can't be serious." His voice cracked, but the crowd's murmurs rose, drowning him. Citizens from Millbrook, some dripping from the storm, had crowded into the hallway after following the emergency convoy. Their voices overlapped. "He tried to stop a man saving his niece. That dog did more justice than Doyle ever did." Caleb stayed silent, but his chest loosened with quiet relief. He met Doyle's glare without flinching. Beside him, Max let out a low, almost satisfied huff, as if he, too, recognized victory when he saw it. Moments later, a nurse emerged from Ava's room, peeling off her gloves. Her face broke into a tired but genuine smile. "She's stabilizing," she said, voice clear enough for the crowd to hear. "The transfusion's working. She's going to make it." A cheer erupted, echoing down the sterile hallways. Angela collapsed against David's shoulder, sobbing with relief. David held her tightly, his own tears lost in the storm of gratitude. Caleb leaned against the wall, finally allowing himself a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ethan, still recording, whispered into his phone camera. "They did it. The officer, the man, the dog, they saved her. This is justice and hope." Within minutes, the clip Justice and Hope spread like wildfire across social media, becoming not just a local story, but a symbol. For Caleb, none of that mattered in the moment. He looked down at Max, who sat with ears forward, tail brushing faintly against the floor. "You're the real hero, partner," Caleb murmured. And for the first time that night, in the brightness of the hospital hallway, Max wagged his tail. The storm that had once battered Millbrook was now just a memory. A month later, the small Georgia town basked under the crisp sun of early autumn. Leaves turned amber and gold, drifting lazily across the courthouse square where the old town hall stood. Its red brick walls, worn but proud, framed the scene of renewal. The hall's tall windows glistened, and the steps leading to its double doors were lined with townsfolk, murmuring in anticipation. Inside, the main chamber was filled to the rafters. Rows of folding chairs held farmers in their Sunday best, shopkeepers still wearing aprons, and families who had come to see a rare event in Millbrook and official commendation. The smell of polished wood mingled with the faint aroma of pies cooling in the lobby, baked by Mrs. Janine Holloway herself, who had insisted the town mark the day not only with speeches, but with sweetness. At the front of the hall, a small stage had been decorated with flags and banners. A podium stood ready, flanked by the seal of Millbrook. Behind it sat a long table where the mayor, the police chief, and several community leaders waited. Mayor Harold Whitaker, a rotund man in his late 60s with a white beard and twinkling eyes, adjusted his glasses nervously. Known for his love of long-winded stories and his gentle humor, he nevertheless carried a seriousness today, aware that this moment had already reached far beyond Millbrook's borders. In the crowd, phones were raised, cameras ready. Reporters from Atlanta had made the drive, intrigued by the viral story that had turned Millbrook into a symbol of conscience. Ethan Martinez sat proudly in the second row, hoodie traded for a clean button-up shirt, his phone still in his hand. He had been invited as an honored guest, though his cheeks flushed every time someone whispered, "That's the kid who filmed it." His mother sat beside him, resting a protective arm across his shoulders. The double doors creaked open, and all heads turned. David Carter entered, tall and composed, his leather jacket replaced by a clean shirt and slacks borrowed from a friend. In his arms he carried Ava, no longer pale and frail but radiant, her cheeks flushed with the rosy hue of recovery. Her hair was braided neatly by her mother Angela, who followed close behind with eyes glistening with gratitude. Ava clutched something tightly in her small hands, her face bright with the shy smile of a child who had stared at death and won. Applause thundered through the hall as David made his way down the aisle. He held his niece close, eyes sweeping the crowd with humility. At the stage, he paused, placing Ava on her feet. She wobbled a little, still weak, but the sight of her walking alone drew tears from the eyes of more than a few hardened townsfolk. And then came Caleb Hayes. He entered not in his uniform, but in a simple suit, the kind that looked almost too formal for him. His blonde hair was trimmed neatly, and though the lines of duty still marked his face, there was something softer now, something freer. Beside him walked Max, his fur brushed until it gleamed, his gait proud yet playful. The old German shepherd drew as much attention as any human. Children leaned forward in their seats, pointing and whispering, "That's him, the dog who knew." Caleb's heart pounded as he mounted the stage. He had faced danger in his career, but nothing made him sweat like standing before his neighbors, prepared to admit fault. He stepped to the podium, cleared his throat, and let his eyes sweep the crowd. "I stand here today not as a perfect man, and not as a perfect officer," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "A month ago, I nearly made the worst mistake of my career. I nearly ignored the truth standing right in front of me, a truth carried in the eyes of a desperate man and in the instincts of a dog who has never failed me. If I had chosen differently, little Ava Carter might not be here with us now. For that, I am deeply sorry, and I am deeply grateful." He turned to David and Angela, who stood nearby. "David, you trusted me even when I did not trust you. Angela, you placed your daughter's life in the hands of strangers. I hope today begins to mend what was broken." The hall fell silent for a beat, then erupted into applause. David stepped forward, clasping Caleb's hand firmly. "You did the right thing when it mattered," he said, his voice carrying. "That's all any of us can ask." Chief Marla Bennett rose next, her auburn hair catching the light. She carried a small velvet box in her hands, her expression softer than her usual steel. "Today," she declared, "we recognize not just an officer but a partner whose loyalty reminds us what justice should look like." She opened the box, revealing a gleaming medal inscribed with the words, "Service of Compassion." The ribbon was deep blue, the medallion heavy and shining. She crouched slightly, and with surprising tenderness fastened it to Max's collar. The hall burst into cheers and laughter as Max shook his head, the medal clinking lightly. Ava giggled, stepping forward on unsteady legs. From behind her back she pulled a small scarf-white fabric embroidered clumsily with the words, "Thank you," in red thread. She bent down and tied it around Max's neck. The old shepherd wagged his tail and then, true to his mischievous spirit, tugged playfully at Caleb's jacket sleeve with his teeth. Caleb stumbled a little, startled, and the hall erupted into laughter, the sound bright and warm. Mayor Whitaker took the podium last, voice booming with theatrical flair. "This town has seen its share of storms," he said, gesturing broadly. "But in those storms, we are reminded, justice is not only in laws written on paper, but in hearts willing to listen, in hands willing to act, and in dogs who remind us of our better nature." The applause that followed was deafening. Families stood, neighbors hugged, and strangers wiped their eyes. For a moment in that small town hall, differences dissolved. Caleb knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears. "You've earned your rest, partner," he whispered. "But somehow, I don't think you're done teaching me yet." Max wagged his tail, scarf fluttering, metal gleaming under the lights. Ava reached out and hugged the dog's neck, her small arms clutching tightly. Around them, Millbrook's people cheered not for law or authority, but for compassion that had bridged suspicion and truth. And so, under the bright lights of the hall, with laughter echoing and hope rekindled, a new beginning was born, not just for a family, not just for an officer and his dog, but for an entire town learning again that justice, at its core, beats in the heart. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as lightning from the sky, but in the quiet faith of a man who refuses to give up, in the loyalty of a scarred old dog, and in the courage to do what is right even when the world says otherwise. This story reminds us that God's hand often works through the ordinary, turning hesitation into hope, suspicion into trust, and fear into life renewed. In our daily lives, we may not be rushing blood to a hospital, but we face choices every day, moments where compassion matters more than pride, where listening matters more than judging. If we open our hearts, we may discover that God's miracles are still here, guiding us in ways we do not always see. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that love, faith, and courage can still change the world, share this story with someone who needs hope today. Comment below with amen so we can pray together for strength and protection in our own lives. And if you want to keep walking with us through stories of faith, redemption, and the miracles God still brings, hit subscribe and join our family. May God bless you and everyone you love.